Well, welcome back, Jimmy Buffett fans. I am your host, David Kay, and this is another episode of All the Stories That I Can Tell. Hit the subscribe, hit the like, hit the notification, and I have a very special episode coming forward right now. This episode is going to be a little bit different than what we've done in the past. We're going to take it off a little bit of the beaten path of the direct Jimmy Buffett stories, and we're going to do something a little different on this one. On this episode, we are going to talk about 1964 and when the Beatles, the Fab Four, came to Key West. And you're going to hear that story. So stick around. I think you guys are going to enjoy this episode. All right, so I'm coming to you from the Key West Hyatt at Windward Point, right here on South Roosevelt, right near the airport. And behind me is what is all that remains of the former Key Wester Motel. And this is the story about the British invasion of the Beatles coming to Key West. So, 1964, September 1964, the Beatles were in the midst of their world tour. They were taking over America. They were the number one most popular group in the entire world. And they were scheduled to play a show in Jacksonville, Florida at the Gator Bowl. Now, having it being Florida in September, that is prime hurricane season. And sure enough, a hurricane was approaching Jacksonville area, Hurricane Dora. So there had to be a way to get the Beatles out of harm's way for a couple of days until the storm passed so they can resume the concert. So the decision was made to fly the Beatles down here to Key West. And they flew them down here. They arrived at about 3:30 in the morning, late into the wee hours of the morning, and the boys slept in late the next day. By the time they woke up, word had gotten all over Key West, all over this island, that the British invasion was here. Hundreds of Key West teenagers flooded this area, hoping to catch a glimpse, an autograph, a picture, anything with the Beatles. The press were here. There was a number of photos that were released that are available that you can find of what it was like that first day when they arrived. Word did not take long to get around that the Beatles were here. The Beatles spent most of that first day swimming in the pool, going around taking photos. They had a photographer with them that was taking photos throughout Key West and some other locations around the water area here. But then about middle part through the day, being young men on their very first trip to Key West, they started drinking and drinking and drinking. And anybody that knows that they've been to Key West for the first time, it doesn't take long for the day to get away from you. So not only was the press and everyone else aware that they were here, but the local musicians were aware too. Coffee Butler, local legend musician, found out that who played at Howie's Lounge all the time, found out that they were here, and he came down. Clarence Frog Man Henry, Bill Black and the Exciters, these were the opening acts also for the Beatles on that tour, all brought out their instruments, and they gathered right here in this building. And they started to jam and play music all night long, drinking all night long. And to quote Jimmy, to use one of his lines, this was a commode-hugging drunk night. There was a lot of drinking going on, and it got really bad there for a while, but they were having a great time. Finally, around 4 o'clock in the morning, the police had to come by and break it up and send everybody home. There was an ordinance, it was getting loud, the whole thing. Well, Paul and John stayed up, and when you're drinking that much, your emotions become very raw and you become very open with each other. And they stayed up that night, and they were talking and really letting it all out. And there were a lot of tears, Paul recalls. They were crying quite a bit as they were sitting there. talking to each other. After John's assassination in 1981, Paul wrote a tribute song in 1982 called Here Today. And in that song, he commemorates that day here in Key West with John and the raw emotions. And the line that he wrote commemorating that goes like this: "What about the night we cried because there wasn't any reason left to keep it all inside?" That was for here. So the next day, the Beatles packed up their gear, flew up to the Gator Bowl. The storm, while it had passed, it was still incredibly windy. The Beatles were incredibly hungover, and they put on a great show at the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville. And I believe that's their only Florida concert they ever did. Check me if I'm wrong on that one, but I believe so. So in 1999, the Hyatt bought this property, and they were going to demolish the Key Wester. But they wanted to keep this building where they were jamming all night open. It is now the Abbey Road Snack Shack. And it's here to commemorate the Beatles and that once-in-a-lifetime trip that they took here. And it's a little piece of Key West history. So I really want to give them credit for keeping that piece of history here and keeping that alive. So fast forward a little bit. Jimmy came in 1971. This occurred in 1964. So Jimmy did not cross paths with the Beatles. But it would not be long, decades later, I should say, Jimmy would cross paths with Paul McCartney. I believe it was their wives, Nancy and Jane, who became friends first, I believe. And this was during a trip to St. Bart's where the McCartneys and the Buffetts were both vacationing, and they crossed paths that way initially. But they became very good friends, so much so that they had houses in close proximity to each other in the Hamptons. The wives, like I said, were very good friends, and Paul and Jimmy developed a very close relationship over the last 10, 15 years. So much so that on Jimmy's last album, Paul McCartney played bass on a song called "My Gummy Just Kicked In," and that was actually, the title of that song came from a line that Nancy McCartney said at a social event, and Jimmy thought it was just such a great line, "My gummy just kicked in," that he wrote the song. So he wrote that basically for Nancy and had Paul play on it. So as Jimmy became sick, and he knew he didn't have much time left, Jane reached out to Jimmy's good friend Paul McCartney and said, could you please bring your guitar and come over to our house and play for us, the family and the guests, and for Jimmy to put him at ease. Of course, Paul did, and brought his guitar over, and he sat next to Jimmy, and the last song that he played for Jimmy was "Let It Be." And Jimmy passed away shortly after. The tribute show that was just held at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles not that long ago, Paul McCartney was the headliner for that show, and Paul McCartney played one song on that tribute show. Played "Let It Be." This is all that is left of the time when the Beatles were down here. There's only a couple of days that they were here, but it was legendary. This is not open to the public. Don't ask me how I got in. I have my ways. But if you get a chance to stay here at the Hyatt, please do, and know that the Beatles were right in there, jamming to all hours of the night, doing what young people do in Key West: play music, laugh, have a good time, and do a lot of drinking. Well, all right, there it is. I hope you all enjoyed learning about the Beatles in Key West. Hit that subscribe, hit the like, hit the notification, and thank you all again for watching all the stories that I can tell. Until next time, everybody, fins up.